Within the context of the US, there are roughly 10,000 people who have net worths over $100 million. So these are the elite of the elite. And this group of 10,000, if we're talking about who is really the enemy from within, it is people in and around this cohort of the American population. These roughly 10,000 people with net worths more than what any of us will ever see in our lifetime. These are the people who are setting policy and driving society. And the reason why these people are allowed to flourish dates all the way back to policies that have been put in by the Reagan administration. And when you look at all of the economic policies and tax policies that have been put into place from Reagan going forward, now we start to understand why the wealth gap continues to widen, why whenever there is an economic crisis, it is the middle class and the lower class that finances the ability of the elite, the top 1%, to continue to be rescued and bailed out while we are left picking up the pieces. Think about every crisis that has happened since the Reagan administration. In every crisis, the net worths of the millionaires and billionaires continue to go up and climb, while the rest of us, the 99%, are left wrecked in the aftermath. And this, the failure to connect the dots between tax policy, economic policy, and bailouts and the impact on the widening wealth gap is one of the big reasons that the Trump regime has risen to power. When we're talking about what needs to be done after this is settled, one of the things that absolutely needs to be done is a reevaluation of the power of the elites within society. I've said over and over again that every billionaire is evil. And what needs to happen in the post Trump era is that we need to bring back the 90% tax rate. And that tax needs to be applied both to income and wealth. In a functioning society, billionaires should not exist. There's a reason why I say that all billionaires are evil, because their wealth, a fraction of their wealth, could solve so many problems, but they deliberately decide not to use that wealth to solve those problems on a daily basis. When we're talking about a fundamental reordering of society, billionaires should cease to exist. They should be taxed out of existence, and their wealth should be redistributed across the globe to solve some of the most pressing problems that exist today. When we look at the conflicts that are happening all across the globe, it's billionaire interests that are driving those conflicts. Whenever we hear the word terrorist, the reason the word terrorist is used is because people of that country refuse to bend the knee to some billionaire interests. So the billionaires mobilize the military industrial complex and label those countries terrorists. You see this happening in Africa currently, where there's a realignment going on in Africa, where many African countries are moving away from the West and are also consolidating their power with the interest of having their economies be developed through their natural resources. The current power structure in terms of how the world is organized has has the global south being the source of raw materials for the West. And when you see Asian countries and African countries state that they no longer are going to play by these games, you see language popping up where these countries are labeled terrorist havens. All of that language comes out of billionaires' interests in extracting as much wealth as they can from the global south and from society in general to feed their own interests. That is why they are setting up these freedom towns and freedom principalities all across the globe. It is an extraction exercise, which again supports the narrative that these people are unflinchingly evil and need to be eliminated from society. How do we do that? There needs to be a 90% tax that is levied on the income of billionaires. There needs to be a 90% wealth tax implemented to these billionaires. And what is interesting is that all of these billionaires have convinced everyone else that if we give them more tax cuts, we'll be better off. We've seen that hasn't worked over the last 50 years. So obviously, the solution is to do something different. And that is what needs to be done. When we understand that the roughly 10,000 people in the US who have net worths over 100 million are truly the core of the enemies within and the evil that exists within the world, even within that group, there are people and companies that deserve some attention. And chief among them are two specific companies that I think deserve some extreme scrutiny. What we've seen over the last several months since this regime has taken over has been the mass mobilization of masked traffickers hitting the streets and kidnapping people in broad daylight. That initiative has been driven by Stephen Miller's policy, but there are two companies and their CEOs that we need to pay attention to that are the tips of the spear when it comes to putting into place the mechanism for ethnic cleansing that is happening right now. Those two companies are CoreCivic and Geo Group. CoreCivic and Geo Group are two security companies that have massive contracts with the Trump regime to run private prisons. These are two companies that are in the business of imprisoning people in the US. In the land of the free, these people and these companies are profiting off of the misery that this regime is putting forward, and they're profiting from creating some of the worst gulags in American history. And when we look at the companies and their mission and the people that are running both of those companies, we need to understand the roles that Damon Hinninger and J. David Donahue played. These two are the CEOs of these two companies. And when we put it into a historical context, these two companies and their CEOs are no different than the people that were running the gas chambers and concentration camps in Nazi era Germany. These two people and these two companies are in the business of extermination for profit. So when we're talking about the enemies from within and the evil that exists within the world, the Trump regime has surrounded itself with the worst of the worst when it comes to evil billionaires and evil multimillionaires who are banking on their ability to continue to persecute, imprison, traffic, and exterminate brown and black faces all across the country and all around the world. And let's not forget, when we talk about the two CEOs that run these companies, when we move away from the billionaires that need to be put on trial in a Nuremberg style fashion, the next in line should be the CEOs of these two companies, because they are literally being paid and getting bonused on how many people they can traffic off of the streets of the US and put into gulags never to be seen from again. These are people that need watching. When we take inventory of all of these things that we've seen and we take inventory of what this regime is about, they are so easy and quick to point the finger at everybody else being the true evil that exists within this world because they know the operation that they are running. As always, when it comes to this regime and the Republican Party, it's always about projection. Whenever they accuse somebody of something else, it is stuff that they're doing. We've seen this over and over again in the data. They point the finger at immigrants being violent and dangerous criminals, all the while, who is the most criminal demographic in the US? It is white Christian males who are the most dangerous demographic in the US. When this administration points the finger at the trans community or the LGBTQIA plus community as being groomers and child predators, who is the actual group that is most likely to be predators of children? White Christian males. When this regime talks about the evil and the enemy within, they point the finger at anybody that isn't MAGA. But who are the people that are running out in the streets and bombing governors' mansions and assassinating Democrats and having target lists for abortion facilities and running their vehicles into traffic? Who are they? White Christian males, Republicans, Trump voters. What that indicates is a pattern. This is a pattern of behavior within this group. If we're really going to be serious about the enemies within, and we're really going to be serious about reorienting society in a way where we can have progress, there needs to be a massive effort at demagnification of the US. The MAGA of today are no different than the Nazi supporters in Germany in the 30s, 40s, in the post-World War II era. There needs to be a lot of education and a lot of work that needs to be done to rehabilitate those that can be rehabilitated. But between now and then, one thing is certainly clear. The calls that keep going out for middle ground and compromise are a waste of time. There is no compromise with these people. There is no compromise with people who fundamentally believe that unless you're white, Christian, and male, you do not have a right to exist. These are not people that can be reasoned with. These are not people that can be debated with. They need to be shunned, ridiculed, and ignored, and they need to be completely stripped away from the levers of power so that they can no longer do damage. That is what needs to be done. And the sooner we can do it, the better off we'll be. And while the No Kings protests and the ongoing protests against this regime are a good start, no meaningful change will happen unless we ramp up the intensity of not only these protests, but also the economic boycotts that need to happen to hit the bottom lines of the funders of this regime. There's a reason why Trump backed down on his immigration stance. It's because his donor class said, hey, rounding up immigrants like what you're doing is hurting our bottom lines. It's causing our businesses to fail. That is a signal of the damage that's being done from his policies. So we as consumers and citizens need to boycott these companies and cut off their revenue. Every one of these companies that are supporting this regime needs to feel it in their pocketbooks. Walmart is starting to see it. Target is starting to see it. You're seeing all of these companies start to see it. And that is where we need to go to next. We need to continue what we're doing from a protest perspective, but we need to escalate the boycott and withhold financial support to any and every company that backs this regime. And let's be clear, if you're in the group of companies that is saying nothing, you're on that list too. Those organizations that receive our support in terms of economic support and commerce need to be the ones that are vocally standing against this regime. You can't be a bystander. None of us are bystanders in this. And until we recognize that we hold the power and we cut off the purse strings of these organizations, nothing's going to change. So these protests are a good start. But if we really want to eliminate the evil that exists within this country, MAGA and their business interests need to be crushed.